Hey, everybody, welcome to the Home Care Forum podcast with your hosts, Sasha Guillaume and Amina Cannon. We are doing a video podcast this week. We actually always do video podcasts, but we only put up the audio just because we didn't want to do our makeup. So we're going to be putting this up on YouTube, and I believe on YouTube you can also listen only at an audio if you have a subscription, but we are going to try this model for a bit. Thank you all for the Patreon listeners. We're going to be doing a transition at this point. If I can figure out, and this is we're kind of going on the fly. If I can figure out how to extract the audio only, I'll continue to add that on Patreon for those who like to listen while they're at the gym or driving or what have you. But we are looking to transition 2025 into a video format. So,
Only.
Amina, video format only. Amina's dressing up for these podcasts. I'm gonna look a mess sometimes, I think, but no, I'll do my part. I'll do my part. And so, welcome to the show, the video edition of Home Care Forum podcast. Amina, how's it going?
Going well. I want to do a little bit of a shout out myself about this changed format. I was the holdout. Sasha wanted to do video all along. He wanted to make sure our listeners knew what he looked like. But I was the holdout. So because obviously I have to do a little bit more work to look presentable than Sasha does. He just wakes up pretty, washes his face, and shows up. I have to
Amina,
put on lipstick.
Amina doesn't have to do anything. As you can see. So
Thank
let's
you.
get to it. Let's stop flattering each other and let's get to it. How about that?
Okay.
All
So,
right.
Sasha, why don't you kick it off with the news for this week's episode?
All right, fine. Let's go to January 1, 2025. A group called Medicaid Consumers for Continuity of Care filed a lawsuit against single FI reform in the Southern District. They also filed for a preliminary injunction, and the Department of Health will have 14 days to respond unless an extension is granted. So we have countless lawsuits out there. Some are being dismissed outright, and there's not a good track record. We know the recent lifting of the injunction.
The TRO was lifted last week. We're recording this on the 22nd, so almost about a week ago today, which really caused a large level of confusion among many providers who were relying on that injunction to not produce the consumer and PA information to the MLTCs. And as you can imagine, I've been discussing the implications of that TRO lifting with many clients. So for those of you who are listeners, here's the upshot, right? What has been my take on this. And to be clear, none of this is attorney-client advice or privileged communication. Please speak with your own counsel about this. So as far as the injunction itself relating to consumer information, I continue to believe that there is a HIPAA concern about producing consumer information to the MLTCs. Secondly, I don't understand why the MLTCs need the providers to produce this anyway, because they should have this information to begin with. So the whole ordeal about to produce or not produce, to me, is just a waste of time. I do think that if the provider has a contract with the MLTC, there are probably business associate terms in there that would alleviate the HIPAA concerns, but I would need to look at the specific contract language to be sure. But generally speaking, disclosing the consumer information, the DOH, in my opinion, doesn't have the authority to direct that to be done, even though it is unnecessary. And then secondly, I do think that there are HIPAA concerns about disclosing it in the absence of a proper BAA with the MLTC in effect. Now, just because the TRO is lifted, does it mean that there are no HIPAA or federal violations at issue? Well, Livingston County Supreme Court, as a state court, really doesn't have jurisdiction over HIPAA issues to begin with, right? HIPAA is a federal law. So providers who violate HIPAA are still subject to federal prosecution, breach penalties in the event that there is a breach. So whether or not Livingston County, the Supreme Court judge granted the injunction or not, HIPAA concerns remain. Number one. Secondly, the other information that was asked to be disclosed is personnel information, PA information. Once again, I don't believe that the DOH has any authority to compel providers to disclose this information. And then secondly, whatever authority the DOH does have to facilitate this transfer of information of the personal assistance is trumped, and we'll get to Trump later, but it's trumped by trade secret protections because, as we all know, providers spend quite a lot of money cultivating relationships with caregivers, the contact information for those caregivers, phone numbers, addresses, goodwill, all of that is trade secret protection worthy. And so the provider's trade secret with respect to that personnel information, again, this is just my perspective, is stronger than whatever minimal authority the DOH has to compel providers to disclose this information and facilitate the transition. And so I didn't believe that the DOH was in the right when it came to the personnel information ever. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's my understanding that the majority of providers have still not disclosed the information, even though there was a January 15 deadline. As we've discussed before, the biggest threat of not disclosing was this veiled threat in the December 23rd memo that the state put out, threatening Medicaid disenrollment of providers who fail to cooperate. Now, as we want to remind you, if you haven't heard this episode, it's not clear from that December 23rd memo which specific Medicaid disenrollment they're referring to. Are they referring to CDPAP Medicaid? Well, they're going to take away your business anyway. So what does it hurt if they terminate your Medicaid participation for the FI? And so for entities that are strictly FIs, they really have no threat of, compelling them to disclose this information. For the FIs that are also LICSAs, they could possibly have a concern about the FI and the LICSA Medicaid enrollment being terminated by the DOH for non-cooperation. So is it likely to happen? Probably not. The DOH isn't really paying much attention to this, frankly. I understand from one of my clients who contacted the DOH last Wednesday when this information was due, that the DOH was having a meeting that day to discuss the provision of this information and how it would all flow. So despite the threats, despite the pressure, it seems the DOH is a bit sitting on this whole issue. And so where do we stand? Well, again, my understanding is that most providers have not disclosed this information. We do have a number of subcontractors, though, who have disclosed their information. And they have a BAA with PPL that allows them to share their information. Some of them are quite large. Just transferring them over to PPL's platform will give PPL a significant advantage, an advancement of this whole transition. So don't forget that, because a lot of providers are thinking that collectively, if we don't produce this information, we'll make a dent in the progress of this whole transition. Yeah, but there's about 30 subcontractors at this point who are disclosing their information. And those subcontractors are highly motivated to get this going because, given the rates that PPL is paying them, the only way that the subcontractors are going to make any money is if they result in a significant high thousands number of census and cases by the end of March. That's at a high level how the economics of that works out. So you've got the subcontractors now vying to get this transition going as well. Don't overlook that those fellow providers are pushing this forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because in the Janot versus New York, the state of New York, the court stated that FIs are not Medicaid providers, which only contradicts the requirements of the FIs to enroll in Medicaid. But it also calls into question the threat by the Department of Health to pose against FIs who did not participate in this transfer, right? So if this court, the left hand is saying, hey, you're not Medicaid, the right hand is saying, yes, you are, and you lose. So I think there is that kind of muddies the water and gives an argument to the sides who don't want to transfer the information. And what's happening, though, from some of one of those associations, they're reporting that approximately 13,000 consumers to date have switched from CDPAP to traditional home care via the ACD exams or full PCA training. It seems that as a result, the Department of Health is instituting an unofficial moratorium on the new HHATP approvals as they want to control the growth for the impending audits that will occur next year for the new training program. So DOH wants to make sure that they have enough auditors to supervise and audit for the coming year. So make sure you are dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and meeting those requirements. Now, another editorialized comment I wanted to make is that I think the fiscal intermediaries are doing themselves a disservice by spreading false information to their consumers, saying that as a result of PPL and that they're gonna lose or CDPAP is going away. No, but then as a result of this, PPL indicated that it would launch campaigns on a radio, social media, print media, streaming services, and so on, including flyering in the local communities. In addition to PPL indicating this, the Department of Health also will be launching informational campaigns to educate consumers and PAs on the transition. And I think the pendulum is swinging the other way, where FIs are starting to look like the parties that are interested in their own well-being, telling the consumers that the program is going away, when in fact it is not. CDPAP is not going away. I think it would be beneficial for us to stick to the message that the companies, the small mom and pops, are going away in exchange for this one company with a monopoly, right? In this age of Walmart and Amazon and small business Saturdays, we could harness empathy of our fellow New Yorkers by standing in the truth rather than peddling in fear mongering. So that's something that I think we could take to the politicians, because I think the only solution here is a political solution. We're in the legislative session. Let's start communicating with, and maybe there's a miracle that happens. But that's all. I think that's all that's left to us.
I don't disagree with that. You know, going back to the podcast we've had over the last several months, I was optimistic that there would be many opportunities to reverse course on this. And there still continue to be, right? There are some litigations, they continue to be filed. Just yesterday, there was one filed by a group of consumers, caring professionals before that filed a lawsuit as well, somewhat repeating a lot of the allegations that have already been asserted. So there are still litigation-based opportunities to change course. I don't think that reversal will occur through the legislature. The governor is highly, highly behind this proposal, and the legislature is as well, because the union is pushing for this. On the point of the legislature, it is my understanding that Senator Rivera is or has reintroduced his bill from last year. Now, he had suggested that we take this a bit back, slow down, study it, postpone it, etc. That bill did not advance, and so it expired at the end of the year. He has reintroduced it. I'm not sure if it will go forward, frankly. I have a lot of respect for him, but he's also supported by the unions, right? And so I don't know if it's a genuine effort on his part, or he's just putting it in to pacify the providers while secretly perhaps assuring the union that this will advance after all. So I don't know that legislative relief will help the providers here. Okay. Pivoting a little bit to the legislative arm of our government, the governor has issued her proposed state of the state and budget for the upcoming year. There is a proposal in there to eliminate wage parity for CDPAP, which would result in $200 million in savings. This is the same amount that was mentioned before when a similar proposal was put forth, and that proposal burned without much explanation, except that we know the union killed it. And I have no idea why the union will not kill it here as well, because the union is behind this CDPAP proposal, this transition. They're pushing it all so that they can unionize these workers and have the state paying their health insurance and providing these benefits. So if wage parity goes away, you know, the union strategy is significantly dented. So I don't think that proposal is going anywhere, but it's just laughable, right? That this is still so thoughtlessly being reintroduced by the governor. Although there are supposedly other Medicaid related advantages, it's supposedly a very Medicaid inflated budget. We'll see how much of it makes its way through.
One thing from the budget that stood out for me was that the governor is calling for an MCO tax to help fund Medicaid and to support hospitals. New York State has to fund hospitals annually, and it never seems to have any money for long-term care programs that actually and documentedly have saved the state money from unnecessary hospitalizations and pricier institutional care. This MCO tax will find its way down to the providers, I would assume, because the one thing I do know is the only thing that ever trickles down are expenses. So if you're going to tax the MCOs, they're going to find the money from what they would be sharing with the providers. Not looking forward to that. And those are the unintended consequences that seem to always fall on the providers' laps.
I don't disagree with that. Hospitals first of all, have a very strong lobby in New York State. They have been effective year after year in securing their preservation, even though the market, the patient care, the model of delivering services is leaning more towards community-based care. Year after year, hospitals continue receiving these large grants, boosts of money. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those actually go through, but it is what it is. I've honestly resigned to that idea at this point.
You know what's awful with that as well? At least downstate, the insurance companies also own the hospitals in some instances, right? There are those that have ownership in, and therefore it's just moving money around, right? Like when you're that big, too big to fail, too big to what have you, like it's you can shift around, but the providers are left holding the bag, if you will, even though it might be empty.
Agreed. All right, so do we want to talk a little bit about, the inauguration, what that means for New York? I have
Well,
heard
I
probably every conspiracy theory under the sun at this point.
well, let me transition to that by speaking about the reported flu season and the widespread activity that is occurring there, right? Americans have to deal with the flu, RSV, COVID, and there's a lurking H5N1 bird flu, which if mutated would be 20 times more deadly than the COVID virus was. All this while France allegedly is attempting to contain the HMPV virus that has led to school closings across the country. Now, this is all in time for the inauguration of Donald J. Trump and his administration. And we hope that they have learned from the first time around and us as well, right? Hopefully, we have learned that we need to take the necessary precautions to get the PPE in place and prevent spread by keeping our staff and patients safe uh, throughout any future pandemic or epidemic. So, but that's my, again, maybe a little editorialized take on healthcare implications of the new administration.
So one thing I forgot to mention that I just want to go back related to CDPAP, a trend that I've seen in some of the recent litigations that have been filed with respect to CDPAP that have been getting a lot of people upset, even more so than the general frustration with this whole thing, is that PPL has common ownership with a separate company that provides consulting and advisory services to the state of New York. And so effectively, the PPL folks have been embedded within the DOH from the get-go. And the argument is in these litigations that because of that relationship and common ownership, the state was predisposed and influenced to select them in the first place. And there is precedent, actually, federal precedent, that would invalidate an award of a bid on this level of, I don't want to call it insider trading, but this type of a conflict of interest and relationship between a bidder on a public contract. And kudos to the Freedom Care attorneys who brought this argument to light initially, and the lawsuits that have been filed afterwards are just expanding on that as well in different courts, right? Everybody's trying to get a crack at the same apple. The arguments are a little bit different, but the Freedom Care folks who filed this litigation initially were the ones to identify this relationship. The other thing that I don't know if we talked about this one in the past, I forget at this point, but Freedom Care has filed a lawsuit alleging that the state is retaliating against it because they commenced an OMIG audit against Freedom Care related to their home care services, allegedly in retaliation for Freedom Care suing the state of New York related to the CDPAP PPL saga. I, again, give a lot of credit to Freedom Care for being so bold and brave to file that lawsuit, because I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had providers not do something because they are afraid of this very retaliatory action by the state or by a plan. So kudos to them for being trailblazers in that regard. I really hope that they succeed. It could be an accident or a coincidence that they got audited. It'll be interesting to see what the government has to say about how Freedom Care was selected for the audit. We'll learn a lot about that process as well as part of the government's proof, because they will have to respond and explain how and why Freedom Care was selected. They'll have to say it was in the ordinary course of selecting providers for audit. And so it'll be interesting as well. We're watching that litigation because, again, I also always have providers asking me how and why was I selected, right? Is this just an individual situation that they're looking at, or am I subject to now a company-wide audit of my practices? So that's the other thing I wanted to just make sure our listeners know we're paying attention to.
Like Freedom Care is about to become a hero to a lot of providers, right? How easily they go to the other side, right? But they're able to fight it because they are bigger and stronger financially. So we wish them the best of luck. Hopefully, the whatever TROs or whatever results from this lawsuit applies to the industry at large and not just them. So we will see.
Okay, one last thing before we transition to the federal updates. Very little. I mean, the federal updates are that everything's in a state of flux. Forget everything that Biden has done. Trump couldn't wait to get in there and just bulldoze through it. One thing I want to mention is that if you recall from our previous podcast, we discussed that there is this grant program for training centers. A stipend would be granted to the trainees, and it's intended to increase the number of home health aides in New York State. Just a clarification, the participants in this program, the students, do need to be paid at least state minimum wage. It doesn't seem like it's the home care worker minimum wage, because these people are not, well, in my opinion, they're not employees in the first place, right? So they shouldn't be paid for attendance there, but supposedly that is the purpose of the grant, to incentivize them to go to school. And so they are supposed to be treated as employees and paid at least New York State minimum wage, not the home care worker minimum wage. So the award has been made. It allows for there to be subcontractor training centers. And so everybody providing the training needs to be aware that the funding and the reimbursement by the state is contingent on all the requirements of the application and the stipend program. One of them being that the students, the future home health aides, be paid for their time in the program. Okay, with that, federal updates. I mean, do you want to, like, he signed so many orders, right? Executive orders. There was conversation about sanctuary cities losing their status. And that may be something that affects the workforce as well in New York State. That's the first thing that comes to mind that has a direct relationship to New York State. The second one has to do with maybe Trump issuing an executive order to somehow stop the CDPAP transition. I think he's got too many things going on, frankly. But that is something I keep, hearing about. Third, he hasn't done anything in this regard yet, but there will be all of these executive agency reshufflings. Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Department of Education may be going away entirely, right? And then he's also asked that the Department of Justice investigate which states are impeding the federal immigration laws. So, for example, to the extent, Hochul is protecting illegal immigrants. And this is not lawfully residing individuals, but this is individuals who are here illegally. To the extent she's protecting them in contravention of what the federal government and his administration is seeking to do, I think he's going to be pulling some form of federal aid to New York State. So that'll be interesting to see how that situation evolves. And again, I'm watching it because I know there are a lot of illegal immigrant workers who, one way or another, do secure employment in home care, or for our wealthy administrators, providers, owners in the homes directly, who may be working directly for the families. So we will have more information on that. What struck out for you? Oh, and by the way, the tariff issue is also interesting to me. Supposedly China was going to be subject to it, Mexico and Canada, but it sounds like it's just Canada and Mexico at this point. So while the cost of my AirPods is not going to go up, my daily avocado, my daily avocado supply is going to be forced to dwindle.
For me, the things that struck out were the cherries that Trump dangles in front of everybody, which are great, right? The Gulf of America. I mean, come on, that's wonderful, right? So let's I just love that. And then the other thing, but I kind of have a dark sense of humor, is the clip that was caught after he ended the session and his assistant was trying to get him to sign a proclamation or something related to Martin Luther King, and he just completely ignored it, and he just kept pushing through, which was I laughed out loud, right? So I have a dark sense of humor, and he knows who his constituents are, and maybe he signed it after, but a true politics. I've been trying to avoid politics. My goal was to avoid for the next 4 years. I know I can't, but I'll for the next episode. I'll have more of a say on the federal side.
Okay. Yeah, I just, well, I haven't seen yet what he's going to do with Ukraine and that whole conflict with Russia.
He says it shouldn't have happened. If it was in, it wouldn't have happened. And now he's got what first 100 hours it's supposed to be resolved or whatever he had a short timeline. He said it was going to
To
be
do what?
he's going to end it. The war is going to end. And
How? He's
I
going to force a
no
ceasefire? He's going
no
to
I
withdraw
no idea.
funding?
I
Okay.
mean, the speculation was that he's just going to tell Russia to take land at where they are, right? It's going to be as of this date where you control, that's yours, and Ukraine has a new border. So I don't know. I
Mm,
did, that's speculation. So you never know with him. So
okay.
they're saying Gaza is going to become a new resort town too. So who knows? Until he says it and the courts don't strike it down, it's all talk. We'll
With
see.
a Trump Tower, right?
Why not?
Overlooking.
There
Oh my
you
goodness.
go.
Okay, very
All
good.
right.
Well, thanks to everybody for tuning in. I hope they enjoy the video format of this, and let us know actually if you do enjoy it. Leave some comments, send us an email. Let us know.
Please, and we'll do it on YouTube. I'm gonna still post the link on LinkedIn, and we'll do some SEOs and things to get the word out there. Please continue to spread the word. This has been the Home Care Forum podcast with your hosts, Sasha Guillaume and Amina Porakanen. Have a good one.